All right, well, thanks everyone for coming. My name's Rob. I organize Idea to IPO. We hold events in Silicon Valley. We've been doing it for many years. We hold events from San Jose to San Francisco multiple times a week. We always have a busy calendar of events. I'd like to highlight 2 events that are coming up. The 21st of September, early stage valuation workshop, What is your startup worth? We have Jeff Faust, CVA. He's an expert on valuations. He can tell you what your startup is worth or what it's not worth, and that's going to be at Tech Code in Mountain View. Further on down the line, October 26th, we have a panel discussion, latest innovations in fintech, and we'll probably also talk about AI and fintech, and that's going to be at the College of San Mateo. Check out all the details for those events and all of our events on our website, idea2ipo.com. We were launched officially on February 1st, 2010. At that time, we had no members and no events on our calendar. At this stage, we have over 55,000 members among all our meetup groups in the Bay Area. We've completed over 1,788 events. By any standard, by any measure, we're the most active, most prolific startup event organization in Silicon Valley. Bar none. You're a little premature there, but that's okay. Anyway, I appreciate the enthusiasm. Our mission is to promote entrepreneurship, support entrepreneurs, build community, and provide value in the Silicon Valley startup ecosystem. To that end, we provide content that is practical, actionable, and relevant, stuff that you can actually use to succeed as entrepreneurs. We believe in building community because Silicon Valley is an aspirational ecosystem that attracts people from all over the world who come here to do great things. I'd like to know who here was born and raised in Silicon Valley? Okay. Born and raised. Okay. Well, who here is not originally from Silicon Valley? Well, the vast majority. That's great. Whether you were born and raised here or whether you just arrived last night, it's important for us to provide multiple channels for you to meet people, build relationships, and grow your network. So in addition to our content-oriented events throughout the week, we also have social events. So every few weeks, we have a TGIF mixer. Thank God it's Friday. And these are held at the Hyatt Regency Santa Clara. And the next one is Friday, September 22nd. So you're all invited. I know you guys are usually busy on Friday nights, but just in case, we have an option for you. With regard to value, it's important that we provide value at each and every one of our events. Not just value for your money, which is important because we know many entrepreneurs are struggling financially. So we make sure our events are affordable. And if you cannot afford the cover charge, let me know. We're always looking for team members to help us out at our events. And all our team members can attend all of our events for free. And there are lots of other benefits as well. And we try and have a decent buffet meal at each and every one of our events. Was this a decent buffet meal? I'm glad somebody likes it. Anyway, let's hear it for Perkins Coie for providing the decent buffet meal. More importantly, though, at each and every one of our events, it's important that we provide value for your time, which is your most valuable resource. I always have to ask at each event, anyone here getting any younger? Armin usually raises his hand, but not today. Okay, well, besides our moderator. So when you invest your valuable time to come to our events, we want to ensure that you maximize your ROI. We have many partners that help us do what we do. Law firms, venture capital firms, angel investor groups, incubators, accelerators, colleges, universities, lots of other players in Silicon Valley. Tonight, once again, we're grateful to Perkins Coie for hosting us at this beautiful venue. Is this a beautiful venue? Yeah. So once again, let's hear it for Perkins Coie. A few of our other partners are here tonight. I'd like to also have them come up and, well, I'd like to have them come up and say a few words. So let's hear it for Svi and Optimizing Mind. Applause.
Thank you. At Optimizing Mind, we help our customers with problems associated with robotics and AI. So we can help customers who are training AI understand what it is their AI is actually looking for after they train it. And one more important problem in robotics is that it's really hard to update AI. If you want to train the robot on one new thing, you have to retrain it on all the old things as well. And we have a way of updating networks very easily without changing the other things that it has learned. You will probably hear more about problems in robotics and so on, so I won't take more of your time. But we have a booth over there, and we are happy to help you with the solutions of explainability and easy updatability. Thank you.
Though our local mission is to support entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley, our greater mission, it's a global mission, is to democratize entrepreneurship and innovation all around the world. To that end, we have a robust YouTube channel, youtube.com/idea to IPO. So please go check it out. We've documented and archived many of our events. We have tons of videos, and this rich, valuable content is available on demand, anytime, anywhere, totally free of charge, whether you're in Palo Alto, Maui, Moscow, or Timbuktu. Our partner in this endeavor is Tim Jeggers of Jeggers Films, one of the top professional videographers in Silicon Valley. Let's hear it for Tim.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. So I'm Tim. I'm doing the video for this event. It'll be on the YouTube channel like Rob was saying. You can find all the other Idea to IPO videos there as well. So about me real quick, I cover corporate events like this and just panel discussions, produce other videos for informational pieces, advertising content. Got my start doing weddings about 10 years ago. I'm taking pictures also. I do that for fun, but you know, I do things like headshots and all of that as well. So if you have any questions about video or photography, feel free to talk to me later. I'll be around all night. I'll be in the back. And yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. So I'll pass it back to Rob. Thanks for coming.
Here's the schedule for the rest of the evening. We're going to go right into our panel discussion. Audience members, if you have a question, please hold your question until 8 o'clock or 8:05. Roughly at that point, we'll open up to questions from the audience. We'd like you to come up to the lectern, use the microphone, and this will be very helpful for us to create a great learning resource in terms of our video that we can all use for a long, long time. So think about your questions throughout the discussion. That'll last until 8:30. We'll break at that point. We'll have some networking. You can talk to our panel members one-on-one. 9 o'clock, it's lights out. You have to leave the building. Someone told me there's an after party somewhere. I'm not sure where it is, but we'll figure something out. So at this point, I'm going to pass it off to our distinguished moderator. He's one of the top corporate attorneys in Silicon Valley. He's a partner here at this firm, and he's passionate about helping entrepreneurs succeed. Let's give it up for Armin Palavan.
There you go. Thank you so much, Rob. Really, Rob, my kudos to you and your team for doing this. This is part of the Silicon Valley infrastructure. It's what makes this place tick and work and be great. So, Rob, thank you. I can't say enough great things about what you're doing, and to have 55,000 members and 17 or 1,800 events is amazing over a 7-year period. I've lost my voice a little bit, so hopefully you can bear with me tonight. Just a very brief introduction about myself. I am a partner at the firm. Perkins Coie is one of the leading firms in the Bay Area and internationally doing technology, representing great technology companies. Our first client ever was Boeing. We still are the largest by revenue service provider for Boeing 100 and some odd years later. We incorporated Amazon. We incorporated many of these great companies, Cloudera, Box, and then the names go on for many companies that you guys know and acknowledge. My focus is emerging companies and venture capital. I also love to do private equity work, which is more complicated transactions, usually not in the technology field. I cross, various sectors. Robotics certainly, runs across the gamut, and I'm very excited to be here. I have a very dear friend of mine, Shaheen, on the panel, so I'm happy to be here with Shaheen as well to do this. One of the things I tell you that I do actually feel younger every day is because I hang out with all of you guys. And this is the greatest pleasure, getting up in the morning to come here and knowing that I'm surrounded by all these, incredible minds doing great things and thinking about, future of technology and things that could not be conceived every 5 to 10 years. So my kudos to all of you. So thank you for coming to the event. Just briefly, before I go to the introduction, I was told by Rob to ask a few questions. So just to get a sense about the demographic of the folks here, and I got a chance to say hello to a couple of you guys, and I know a couple of you from the past. So how many of you guys are employees of robotics companies that you're here? Right? And, obviously robotics runs the gamut. There's aspects of robotics in many hardware companies. I know, Sarah, you were, I'm sure Qualcomm uses robotics in various sectors of it. So you should raise your hand. So there's 2 of you. So how many of you are enterprise employees? And this, we're talking about enterprise software, I think. It's kind of what we're looking. So there's a handful of you guys. Any government employees? No? Interesting. Academics? Great. Where are you? An academic. Speak up a little bit. Fantastic. Great. Investors, aside from the panel, do we have any? A few. So you're angel investors, is that right? And there was another fellow that was here earlier as well that left. It gives me a great sense of, where we can use you in these companies. And angel investing is really the initial breadth of many of these companies. Most companies are now getting angel investment as a round. Very few companies actually go to a straight institutional round. So it's a great service that you guys provide for the entire Silicon Valley. So thank you for that. Who has an idea for a robotics startup? Any of you? You do? Great. 2, 3. Great. Adavan, you have some very interesting ideas. It's not quite robotics, but the last question I want to ask is who is here to network, to look for opportunities in robotics field or in the industry? And I think that's, a lot of you are here for that purpose, and hopefully this will serve as a good venue. I know there's at least 2 companies are being represented who are on the panel, and we certainly have 2 investors, so there'll be lots of opportunities for you to find opportunities that could work for you down the line. So with that note, I just wanted to go with the introduction to the panels, to the panelists. So Chris, can you please give me a brief introduction about yourself, and then we'll go down the path here.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Chris Cianci. We were given 2 instructions. The first was to be brief, and the second was to speak slowly. Neither of these things are my strong suit, but I will try. So I'm Chris. I have a long history in robotics, going back to when I was very small. They told me to go make friends, and I took them literally. My education was in physics and electrical engineering, culminating in writing my doctoral thesis on distributed intelligence for collective robotics. So swarm systems, large numbers of very small robots. After which I left academia and started making very small numbers of very large robots, and have been working in and around autonomous ground vehicles for some time now. At Current, I am taking a brief hiatus from the robots themselves to build better sensors so that I can use them to build better robots. At AI, we are making novel and different LiDAR sensors that I am very excited about putting intelligence into the sensor so that the data coming out of it is more useful to the robots and roboticists that may leverage the device.
Great. And your education, if you could just tell me where you got educated, that would be great.
Okay. So I studied physics at Occidental College in Los Angeles, electrical and computer engineering at Caltech in Pasadena, and I did my PhD work at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, Switzerland, EPFL.
That's great. Fantastic. Yao. Please.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Yao Zhang, founder and CEO of Roboterra. We are a startup based right here, not too far. Actually, I still want to say thank you again to Rob and also Perkins Coie because I personally, through in the experience of building Roboterra in the past 3.5 years, actually, especially at the beginning, benefited a lot from some of the sessions, like how to evaluate your company, how to set up meetings with early investors. So I personally benefited a lot. And so I'm definitely, it's an honor and also pleasure actually come back to share some of the experiences that we've had. And we've been also a very happy client to Perkins Coie as well, who, because we had teams in, we started from here, but also we have teams in China as well. So a lot of our just incorporation structures and then funding structures and all that complicated issues I can leave in two very good hands. So very happy all these years. So Roboterra is a now Series B stage company. We have slightly more than 70 employees, and we started from here. Hacker Dojo is our birthplace, right next to NASA Ames, and then our current office moved to Santa Clara. But China has bigger team now than our U.S. office, and our product, we have the modularized hardware, we have our own software, and we provide our services to basically school or the learning community, kids of 9 years old all the way up to like 20 or college level. We've had clients more than 500 schools and universities worldwide in more than 30 countries. So that's where we are, and yeah.
We'll save the rest when we get to the conversation on this thing, because I think what you're doing is so interesting and the structure of the company is very interesting, and it's a very much of an innovative way to find the way to finance your company, since capital efficiency is an issue. If you go to Intel Capital and Kleiner and Sequoia and Lux, it may not be an issue, but for some of the other ones, it is an issue to have some capital efficiency, and I think you guys have done a fabulous job, so we'll get to that in a minute. Great. Ashish.
Hi, my name is Ashish Agarwal. It's a pleasure to be on the panel. Thank you so much for inviting, Rob. I work for a fund called Christian Robotics. We are a $100 million fund, primarily.
Speak into the speaker a little bit more.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I work for a fund called Christian Robotics. We are a $100 million fund, primarily investing in early stage companies from seed to Series B, in robotics, hardware, and software that complements hardware. So AI, ML, computer vision algorithms, along with the complete stack from infrastructure, data to vertical applications. We have a more consumer and B2B2C focus, but we also kind of are looking at enterprise and industrial side of things. My personal background, I'm originally from India, born and raised, undergrad in computer science, had luxury to work for Yahoo for 5 years, build out various ad tech products for Yahoo, lived in India, China, and US, built out Yahoo China office, got entrepreneurial bug, went back to India, started a couple of companies, one in social live TV space, one in e-commerce, didn't do well, decided to move back to US, went back to school, did my MBA at Northwestern Kellogg School of Management, also did my master in design thinking and engineering management at the same time from Northwestern University, learned a lot about how to do numbers, worked in VC, decided to go back to operational side, worked in marketing for Dell, for a couple of years, learned a lot about how do you do consumer and enterprise marketing globally, decided to go back to finance side, and then learned a lot about how do you buy and sell companies globally for a company called Opera Software, which is a browser based out of Norway. And then after I completed that gig, wanted to move back to investing. That's when I joined Christian Robotics. So that's my journey. Pleasure to be here.
Shaheen.
Thank you, Armand. Hi, I'm Shaheen. Sorry for being late. I'm a Bay Area native, grew up with a passion for cars and computers and space. So I naturally decided to do a career in engineering. I went to college in the dot-com bubble, so I chose to do a degree in electrical engineering, computer science, and unfortunately graduated in the bust. So I thought I'd
A little bit closer to the speaker.
Oh, so I
Thank you.
graduated in the bust, and so I decided to pursue my second passion, which is cars, and went to Detroit in pursuit of greener pastures, which tells you how bad it was in 2001 here on the peninsula. So it wasn't what I was expecting, so I came back to California, did a PhD in electrical engineering, started a company like many grad students do. Learned the hard way that it's one thing to have a cool technology and it's another to have an interesting business. And so I had the former, but not the latter. And so I went back to being an academic. And during the course of starting my company, I got to know a bunch of VCs. And I said, hey, if you guys are interested in doing semiconductors, let me know. I can show you deals and due diligence for you. And one firm that was very interested in my capabilities, I guess, was Lux Capital when they were getting started. And they asked me to join, and I became the walking West Coast office for a good 5 years until we set up our Palo Alto office, and we built out a team here. And I've led our investments in semiconductors, naturally, given my EE background, rockets, driverless cars, small satellites, manufacturing automation, AI, computer vision for everything from object detection and object recognition to post-production. And proud to be partnered with Armand and a couple companies, and it's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Shaheen. Thanks everybody else for being part of the panel. So let's just go ahead and go to some of the questions. Yao, if you could just take the lead on this. So it's a general statement, it may be a little bit too general, so if you could just narrow it down to your flavor. What is robotics by your definition, and what do you think, aside from the company that you have, are some of the hot areas in robotics?
This is a very good question. This is actually the very first chapter we always have in all our robotics projects to our clients, right? So we actually always use an example of iPhone.
Sure.
We ask our students what are robots, and then sensors, servo motors, mechanical parts added together, a structure that can shape the physical environment kinetically. That's
Right.
the Roboterra perspective, and also my personal agreement on that as well. So we tell our students a phone is a robot without legs, and so eventually we can connect this with some other mechanical structures and turn it into a robot.
Great. Okay, interesting definition. Thank you. Ashish, what is robotics, and what are some of the hot areas in robotics?
I think we don't think of robotics as something kind of, I think the definition of robotics is kind of very, very broad. I think anything that basically helps humans in terms of improving your efficiency, or kind of basically anything that we can use to make our life simpler. I think of that as kind of, it can be either as broad as that, or it can be as complex as you want it to be. But I think in terms of what today's systems are kind of like defined as, in terms of how you're actually applying complex vision technologies to like detect something and solve a problem in terms of either helping humans or aiding humans in certain ways, or for consumer perspective. But I think the definition would change depending on the sector and field you're talking about, as well as whether it's a consumer-focused use case versus enterprise-focused use case. So we think in terms of, mostly in terms of the use cases,
Great.
rather than a more broader ecosystem.
Great. Shaheen.
I would say any kind of non-human minion, whether it's helping us find a restaurant or helping us, clean our floors. I would call that any kind of assistant. I would call a robot.
So I mean, what we're talking about is applications both in the consumer, in the enterprise, and in the manufacturing field. I mean, I think that's probably a broad definition. Chris.
So I like all of these definitions, but for me personally, I think there's always a temptation to over anthropomorphize the idea of a robot. In general,
That was a great word. Over anthropomorphized. That's fantastic. That's
I've got a
great.
microphone. I'm allowed to make up words. So,
I actually understood it. I think it's a very good definition. Seriously.
But yeah, for me personally, I would say very similar to what Yao said. You must have sensors, you must have actuators, and sort of the fuzzy part is there should be some non-trivial connection between them so that it can close that feedback loop and do something that is both interesting and useful.
Does it have to have movement?
It needs to be able to affect its environment. Whether that comes in terms of physical movement or if it exists in more of a virtual environment is a different question.
And that's why you think sensors, what you're doing, is kind of within the robotics.
Well, yes, I have my own biases.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. Shaheen, what are some of the hot areas where there's applications of robotics that are getting funded today? Whether within your own funds or things that are futuristic.
How much time you got?
3
So
minutes
I
for
think,
you.
I think robots can be applied everywhere. Everything. I somewhat disagree with the definition that a robot has to have some kind of physical manifestation. I think Siri is Alexa, Siri. These are all robots that are embodied within an Amazon Echo or within our phones. But I have a hard time.
Well, the actuator is a speaker in that context.
Right. So there's an actuator piece to it. But even in lieu of there being a mechanical component, anyway, we can discuss that offline. But I would be hard pressed to come up with an area that cannot be impacted by robotics, even as it relates to physical, psychiatric, or human psychiatric conditions like depression. There's even robots that are being built that would, in the form of applications, that are helping humans overcome these kinds of issues that typically, only other humans have helped them resolve. So everywhere is the answer.
Great. So, Yao, and I wanted to go back to, tell us a little bit more about your company and what you guys are doing, and some of the, challenges of launching your company as an early stage company first, and then we can go to the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, I guess one of my difference compared to the rest of the panelists are I'm not a product engineer in the robotics field. So my training is in, I have my PhD from economics and education at Columbia. So more on the data science side, I would say. And with experience of building a first company in actually education software. And then I saw that I really want to keep working on educational technology products, and it's really about the time 2012, 2013 that a lot of the very important underlying technologies such as small quantity fast prototyping services are happening. So which made basically working or delivering some hardware products a possibility, lower cost possibility for startups. So, and definitely, I've always been working in the education technology space, and then seeing that actually combining or incorporating the hardware piece to software can make the learning experience much better. So basically, the definition of that product that I want to build became, okay, how can I bring in the concept of robots into learning, and for whom, whether younger kids or older kids, and then whether should I focus on hardware, software, because my background, I've had a company experience in software. So that was the ideas on product. And then when starting a team, so I finished Columbia. Actually, I was with the first in startup experience. I was working for a small VC, looking for deals here. But that's also when I started to attend events like Ideas to IPO and the NASA engineer happy hours. So I started to hunt for my technology co-founder through the Valley. And then this is really the best place to start, startups, as long as you know where you're going. So I just keep talking with people, and then got a good team together, work together. So, but there are a lot of good ideas that learn from other successful startups, such as basically talk with the market, let the market tell you what you should focus on, which applies more to software products. So how can you make that happen in hardware? What Roboterra did was we literally using like laser cutting machines and then 3D printing. We use a lot of this to make our early ugly prototypes. Today we look back, we felt embarrassed, but we had those early prototypes, and then we started to run fee-based sales. And then once we had this early seed users, we saw there's a real market. Then the next step will be how much money, how much funding, initial funding we need to support our team, and then to bring the production into next bigger stage, and then to really get it to the market, and then how to work out the channel strategies, etc. But the initial stage is very important.
Great. Chris, tell us about what you guys are doing at AI. And the name of the company is spelled brilliantly. It's
well,
A-E-Y-E.
the name of the company works better when you see it written down. It is
that's right.
A-E-Y-E.
That's
Like most company names, it has a little bit of unnecessary pretension behind it, but we do what we can. So yes, what we're fundamentally trying to do is to make the process of three-dimensional sensing better. Smaller, lighter, cheaper, lower power budget, longer range, more eye safe, more resistant to shock and vibration, and eventually, when produced at scale, much less expensive.
And
right?
what's the range?
What's the range? So
Not of the cost, but I'm talking
absolutely,
about the vision.
So, and as I carefully try to gauge what things have been already disseminated and what things have not,
Sure.
there was a test about 3 weeks ago wherein we were getting some quite decent results at about 200 meters off of a low reflectivity target.
Right.
So.
That's pretty good. And you envision that these sensors will be deployed where?
Well, so
Who would be buying these?
I would love to make a wide variety of things with them, but I also, I'm very excited to see them in self-driving vehicles.
Right.
This is something that I like building. This is something that I look forward to, using as a consumer, and so yes, I would dearly love to see them applied in self-driving cars, but I also see a large number of applications for them in even perhaps later versions of the product. We have designs that will reduce the weight and power requirements even further to where it could be feasible to put them onto an airborne platform as well.
Great. Fantastic. So, Ashish, let me ask you. So what are some of the challenges to funding some of these companies at an early stage? Where is the pain point? Is it the team? Is it the technology? Is it the market? Is it all of them? And to what? And is there a way to tier these about when you tick off a deal, what the issues are in terms of financing these companies at the seed stage, and then later on?
So I think the answer is it depends, because it's a case by case method in which you're thinking about. So I'll talk about 3 different cases that will cover that. In first case, like for example, there are like a lot of technical teams coming out of academia, which are basically building a very technical solution, but they don't think through the business side of things. I think that what Shaheen was referring to initially, that you have built a solution and then you are going and searching for a problem to solve. I think that's one of the first categories of problem where we see a lot of companies coming out of Israel where they have built a very technical solution which works, but then what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Now, the second part of that is most of the time, if somebody is trying to make an incremental change to something, then the question becomes like, is this incremental change a product or a feature? And I think that in itself kind of like also what people talk about in terms of like how big the market is and what are the dynamics of the market. And that also ties into what are the exit options. Like for example, if you're trying to build something in cafeteria market, there are 3 main large players. And cafeteria market is very, very strict about cost structure. And if you look at the history of the M&A, none of those companies have actually acquired any company beyond $300, $400 million. So all of these things kind of like play into the back of the mind of an investor to say like, hey, even if I invest you, what is the capital requirement for your business? And what is the eventual exit option that you will have from that perspective?
Right, and the capital efficiency or the not so capital efficient model is a real key in these investments, robotics investments. Am I correct?
So I think it depends from case to case basis, because the thing is, if you're building a $1,000 LiDAR, but the premium that you can charge to customer, and from that perspective and the value that you're creating is much larger at the table, and it's very easy for different people in the value chain to benefit from that particular change. In that case, you have to see that, like, what are you doing? What are you replacing? Is that a new budget that's coming out? But yeah, in that case, like if you are building something very, very, which is like, for example, a lot of these agricultural robots that are basically trying to go and pick apple, like picking apple, like because of the lack of labor, it's a very real problem that needs to be solved today. If you ask like people who own apple farms, and the problem is that a single robot is $500,000. It's a very expensive robot to just go for somebody to go and pick an apple. So you always think about like, hey, if you have to deploy 1,000 of these units, it's $500 million of $50 million or $500 million of capex that you need. So that is definitely a big factor in terms of, like, some investors like who have smaller funds would shy away from investing in those companies.
Exactly, and that's the difference between you and Shahin's fund, right? Where you have $100 million to deploy on your current, dry powder. Shahin, if you would please share with us what is your dry powder and what is your perspective
so
on
our model. So to answer your question, we're managing a little bit over $1 billion. Our current fund is a $400 million fund, and our check sizes range from typically $5 to $15 million to lead a Series A, but we also are amenable to doing seed investing as well. So to the question on capital efficiency, my advice to founders, and most of you guys are founders, is not to anchor yourselves to getting something to market as fast as possible, to hit profitability as soon as possible. It's nice to generate some revenue, but it should not detract you from your model. So VCs are not solving for getting to profitability as fast as possible. VCs are solving for generating an inflection in enterprise value. We want you to generate tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of enterprise value with tens of millions of dollars of invested capital. So the expectation is, okay, what inflection points do we have to hit? Is it signing on a customer? Is it having X numbers of users? Is it hitting this technical milestone? Depending on what business you're in, it's crucial to understand in the early stages what those inflection points are, and it's also more crucial perhaps for you to be in agreement with your investor syndicate and your board members that these are the milestones that you're hitting and why they matter, and then going for those milestones which may have nothing to do with generating a dime in revenue, and perhaps even being, I mean, if you look at companies like Snap, Snap's a public company, it's not profitable. So what you're solving for is creating and maintaining a vision in the long term of growth and profitability, which may be 10 years out.
So, Yao, you have some really interesting background in this because your company was funded initially in the US and then you've gone to China to kind of find the dollars to finance the company that's partly related to your market and where the Chinese market is on robotics and tech and otherwise. So you have some nice observations that you shared with me. If you could please share that with the audience, that would be great.
Yeah. Actually, definitely agree that seek the right VCs and at different stages is very important. That the VCs or the vision or the board members you're bringing in matches the vision, the entrepreneur, the founder, CEO that you have for your company. So in Robotics experience, we are a Valley startup, and then we started from here. So our seed and also Series A are both raised with basically American investors. And last year, our sales in China is already more than 70% for the company. It's really because China has the world's best and largest education technology market in terms of, the families are spending 60-70% of their household deposit income onto their kids' education, and as a company, basically brings in a lot of innovative things into this space that the Chinese market really values this. So we even are charging, well, I know this is videoed, we are actually charging a price premium on our products outside of the U.S. than products sold here. So so it's really the values for this. So given that China became our main market already, and also the manufacturing of the products, the main parts of that is also in China. So so when we're raising Series B earlier this year, we actually got different interest or term sheets from different investors, and then we realized that some of this basically now our investors are strategic investors, a public company in China who can connect us directly with thousands, tens of thousands of schools, millions of students directly. So for us at this stage, we are scaling up the revenue. So we decided, okay, that's the decision we're going to do. But one thing, for example, China is a country with very strict foreign currency policies. So as a U.S. company, in order to receive Chinese renminbi money investment, legally we have to do a lot of company structure change. For us, we basically have to use our China entity, which was a subsidiary for our U.S. entity, but we have to use that to receive that investment and turn that into the holding structure and then acquire U.S. so that the investors and also all the previous investors still are the investors of Roboterra Group, and then holding all our, all the IPs and also revenues, all the assets that our company is generating. So that's the experience.
Yeah. So just to tell you a little bit about, maybe in different words, in China, there's been recent regulation where you cannot move money if you're a Chinese fund. You cannot actually move money outside of China for investment in the U.S. So all this machinations have come about recently. Obviously, some of these venture capital funds or private equity funds have money in, currencies in Hong Kong or Singapore or sometimes in the U.S. Obviously, there's no problem about that. But any new investment that's being done has to be done inside a China entity. So you would establish a Chinese subsidiary and fund that entity. You still have the same problem about how to get that money back to the U.S. for some U.S. operations, because you have both the China entity operating and the U.S. entity operating. So she's talking about the complexity of how to get money back to the U.S. entity so it can fund its operations, right? So that's the bifurcation.
I do want to add one thing on that. So, as a once, on the investment side as well, and now entrepreneur. So what, he just described really means actually there's a lot of capital now in China, the big public companies and also successful companies as well, who are very actively seeking investment opportunities, good deals, but because they couldn't really invest in the US anymore. So it makes sense for startups. If you have any business presence or you need expenditures such as supply chain related in China anyways, so you might want to consider some investment in China as well.
And the reason you went to China initially, did you seek some investment funds in the US, and maybe you didn't get as warm of a reception and that's when you went to China? Or did you just, as a strategy, think up front that I'm going to go to China and that's what I'm going to do?
Yeah,
obviously you have an advantage being born in China.
Yeah, for us, it's more. It's actually on the second, the lucky side. So, Roboterra started here, and then year 2, we already are getting a lot of really big deal inquiries from Chinese clients. So we had to establish our China entity anyways. We had to put a sales team there, and then later on customer support, and then customer engineers as well. So the China team is growing, and then revenue there is growing as well. And then we were quite well. We have been quite well recognized in the China market, whether in investment circle or just client circle. So investors are always knocking on our doors. Not exaggerating. In some way, being, as a team based in here, but with me, the founder, as a Chinese person on the team. So our Valley office basically receives investor inquiries on a weekly basis. They just want to come and see us here from all over the world, and a lot of them are Chinese investors.
Very interesting. Chris, if you can just tell us some of your vision about where some of the robotics are, from a technology perspective, is going to go
Where
for
are
the
we
rest
going
of
to go?
for 2018. Obviously, 2017 we're kind of done with almost.
Yeah.
What are the next generations of robotics innovations?
Well, I would say that I mean that's actually a relatively short time scale, right? You know, the
Maybe
field of
add 2019 to
absolutely,
it.
absolutely. So the field of robotics, you know, in general, despite having been around for, you know, probably between 50 and 70 years now, depending on who you ask, is in the grand scheme of history actually really quite young. And so we are seeing many exciting things happen right about now. But with respect to actually, you know, coming into, say, a consumer market, there's a long way to go in a lot of the different pieces. So, like I was saying earlier, one of the applications that I'm most excited about is, of course, transportation, and I do see that coming in you know, dribs and drabs and a few false starts, but I see it coming. Now, is it going to be here over the next couple of years? Personally, I'm skeptical, but I would like to see, you know, some partial deployments of things of that nature. We also see it, you know, in small ways coming into the home. Assistive technologies, various devices that clean various parts of your home. Other you know, personal assistants, as were mentioned earlier, that might, you know, help manage your calendar for you. So these things are all happening, you know, basically right now, and we see the prototypes. Some of them are even available right now, and I would see some of those things starting to mature over the next couple of years. The ones that, you know, involve less hardware are probably going to mature faster. Because, you know, there is the flexibility there, and there's also the you know, large amount of interest surrounding the current resurgence of learning systems, and so there's a lot of opportunity there to apply some of the compute power that we, you know, haven't had previously to problems that really needed it, and, you know, we'll see things of that nature both maturing in the short term and then being replaced with, you know, a better understanding of how those models and what the model that came out of the learning system, what the learned model actually meant.
Mm-hmm. Ashish, what are the last 2 companies that you invested in? I mean, as long as it's public, or if it's not public, tell us about 2 of the companies that you invested that you can talk about.
So this year we have been really bullish about bike sharing. In China this year, over the past couple of years, the dockless bike sharing has become a very wide phenomena, in which the idea is basically, normally if you go to San Francisco, you might see a public bike sharing program, but in that case the bike is docked into the station, so like you actually have to walk from your home or to the bike sharing station, scan the card, like swipe the card, take the bike, go to your destination, find the nearby station, and then put your bike into that station and then walk from there to your destination. So the concept of dockless bike sharing is that what they've done is they've put in the GPS functionality into the lock itself or as part of the bike. So you basically can open the app similar to Uber. You would see like a bunch of these bikes on the map. You go find where the bike is. You scan from your app the QR code on the bike. It opens the lock. You just ride the bike wherever you want to go and just park the bike at your destination. You just lock the bike, and that's the end of your ride. So you don't have to worry about walking. So that solves the problem of like last mile transportation. It has fundamentally changed the way a lot of these people travel in China specifically. Like there are like millions of bikes now in the streets of Shanghai, Beijing. If you go there from that perspective. So from that perspective, we invested in 2 companies recently, one in Hong Kong and one in Singapore, and 1 company over here in the US.
Interesting. Go ahead.
So what I would be curious about is have either of those 2 companies found that they have to apply active redistribution at any point of that cycle? Yeah.
So the active redistribution, basically what it means is like based on supply and demand, like if in the morning like people are going one direction, that in the evening not everybody going to want to come back, so the bike gets redistributed. So you have to maintain the supply and demand depending on that. So from the redistribution perspective, there are by giving incentives to people to kind of like say like, hey, this bike, if you drive this bike from point A to point B, it's a free ride. So by creating those type of incentives, you are able to kind of like reduce the cost of redistribution on that side. But yes, it works when you have certain amount of density of bikes in that area.
And Shaheen, autonomous vehicles. I know that we worked on a deal together, and drones. Those are 2 aspects, and I think they're right in the hot spot of robotics. Tell us about some of the companies you've invested in, to the extent you can disclose them, and give us some perspectives on those 2 markets.
Sure. So flying and rolling robots, I guess. On the flying robot side, we've made a few drone investments. One is called Sci-Fi, which was founded by one of the co-founders of iRobot, Helen Grenier, which is making an interesting class of drones that have various military and industrial applications. They're persistent, they're very robust, and they've been very effective for these heavy-duty types of applications. Another drone investment that we made is a company called AirMap, and they are the air traffic control of low-altitude aircraft. And so imagine a world without air traffic control for airlines. It would be basically extremely dangerous and impractical. The world that the framework that we need for operating low-altitude aircraft, whether it's delivery drones, whether it's recreational drones, whether it's photography drones, whatever you want to call them, needs to operate under a global framework, and that's what AirMap is building and plans to offer many services on top. Another drone investment is called Hanger, and they are kind of like the Uber for drones in a sense that if you want to have an area surveyed or mapped or pictures taken or any drone-related task done, you will basically contact or log into the Hanger app, and then somebody who's with the drone in that area of interest will basically do the work that needs to be done, and you will get the answer. So they act as that broker of drone-related services. We also invested in Drone Racing League, which we expect to be like the future NFL, which is merging kind of AR, VR, and drones, all the buzzwords together, in a sports league that does races where basically pilots wear VR goggles and they race drones around a racetrack, and the drones that they've built for this are amongst the fastest drones in existence. So check it out on ESPN. It's airing right now. And then what other drone investments have we made? I think that's it on the drones.
On the autonomous vehicles.
On the road-going robot side, we funded Zoox, which is reinventing the car from scratch with the intent of it being autonomous. So think about the invention of the car. You had tinkers putting motors on the bottoms of carriages and getting rid of the horses. Well, none of those really took off except for extremely rich people until Henry Ford got together with the Dodge brothers and said, hey, let's come up with a vehicle architecture that makes sense for a self-propelled vehicle. And they came up with the architecture for cars that still lives on today. So the notion of putting sensors and actuators in a Ford Taurus is analogous to putting a motor on a carriage. And so Zoox is creating a new vehicle design that is conducive to being autonomous, and we expect to be widespread in the next 10 years. And they've raised almost $300 million. They're about 300 people, and they're doing some pretty interesting things.
Great. So we are at 8 o'clock. Let's, where's Rob? Rob's around, okay. So we wanted to go ahead and take some questions that you guys may have. And the way Rob likes to do it is to make sure that you guys come up here and ask the question from here.
First of all, let's hear it for our panel. So we'd like to take as many questions as possible and be as interactive as possible. So if you have a question, come on up, ask away. We ask that you don't make any blatant pitches. It's not a pitch event. So who's got a question for our panel? Come on, you know, have a question. Come on up. Come on up. No, you're actually not on film. But anyway, ask.
So I have a question about the mobile service robot market. Is it something have a bright future? Or what's the limitation? And what's the view for the VCs and entrepreneurs on that? Especially non-warehouse mobile robots like Savioke and robots on the public space.
So you're talking about these sidewalk delivery robots.
Or yeah, Nightscope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't have an opinion for or against them. I can raise some of the concerns that I've had when I've looked at these companies. One big concern is that you're competing directly against relatively cheap labor. And I generally, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all VCs, but I generally have an aversion to directly competing with human labor. And what I would challenge these companies with is coming up with a way to improve the experience for the customer. So if you guys got a package on your doorstep from Amazon, if it was a human that delivered that package or a robot that delivered that package, I highly doubt that that experience would be different for any of you in the audience, unless there was a product or service that could be offered that would be unique and special by virtue of having these robots. In the case of Nightscope, if there is a human watching or a camera or a robot kind of rolling around over there, what you're solving for is a level of security. And if that level of security can be achieved with somebody sitting in the corner or somebody looking through a camera, then I'm not sure if a robot rolling around will make you feel any more secure, again, unless there is a new level of security that can be offered through having that rolling robot. So I feel like as if the emphasis right now is placed more on novelty with these robots than service. So Savioke, for example, you know, if hotels, if a one-star or two-star hotel that otherwise doesn't offer, whatever room service now can offer room service with the Savioke robot, that becomes interesting, and the economics enabled by that. So if we can create a new market where none existed with one of these robots, that's interesting. But if you're just, again, directly replacing human labor, then it becomes somewhat challenging, at least for me personally.
Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think I have a different perspective than Shaheen on that. I think the way we think about that is kind of in terms of fundamentally the way these companies are I'm just talking more about the economic side of the business. Is people saying like, hey, you are paying $100 for human labor, we will charge you like 40% less, right? Rather than, and the functionality is not exactly what a human does, because a human does a lot of other things, and people just kind of like start with like, oh, 80% of the time a human does that, so that's what we are going to solve for. But then I think fundamentally like what Shaheen is saying in terms of like solving the core problem and finding what are the substitutes and thinking about from that perspective would be very helpful, where you are not only trying to basically steer dollar away from an existing available solution, but also talking about creating new markets where that solution can be applied in that sense.
Okay, thank you so much.
So I do have friends working in similar product concepts there. So I mean, for me, again, I view the space and also lead my company more from the business perspective. That back to the the business model side of it, I think a technology, you definitely have to think what problem you're solving. If it's last mile delivery, then you really have to look at the market potentials and then the economics of it. And then if you do believe that you have a you have a clear model there, a chance there, then, and I guess that's back to the entrepreneur ambition, right? If you really believe that there's a market for you and you can execute really well and really fast, and then you can be the best in that space. Even maybe in the end, it's not a gazillion billion dollars business, but you do have your own space, and maybe that's just something you want to do. You can still do it.
So without contradicting any of the previous statements, because I think they're all excellent and I agree with them, I will express a small amount of personal reservation with respect to if the device is intended to interact directly with a human on a pseudo-human level, having watched what happened with Hiroshi Shiguru and the Geminoids and the uncanny valley that sort of results, we have a long. I mean, despite an amazing amount of effort being thrown into this problem, largely in the Far Eastern areas of academic research, but we have a long way to go before people will not be creeped out by having to interact with a machine instead of a person. So if it really is about interacting with the device as opposed to interacting with a person, most people are still going, I believe, to want to prefer interacting with the person instead of the robot.
You're talking about the cultural barrier than the technical barrier, right?
And again, I think there were some questions that were proposed on this topic of displacement of human labor over machine, and it's interesting that Shaheen actually hit on that right away, saying that he has an aversion. I think that was the word that you used, unless it really creates a whole new marketplace and it can add value-added services. So it's interesting how, as we're talking about robotics, there is going to be a lot of the social aspects of these deployment of technologies that are going to be real. Like in the medical field, you can invent all sorts of stuff, but the question is, for example, is the doctor really going to use it? So this has the same limitation from a social perspective, and it's interesting to that we actually hit on it, even though we thought about not talking about it. So great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Other questions? You must have questions. All right, if nobody has questions, how about some pitches, Rob? Free legal advice. Whenever you guys need any help, please feel free to call me. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's a question. So I mean, there's a huge change in the terms of software, but how is the hardware able to keep up with it in this particular field? How is the hardware in general hindering development in this particular field?
Chris. Think about that for a moment. Okay.
While Chris is thinking, I can give you my kind of
Go ahead.
off-the-cuff answer. So in my experience, I haven't seen hardware be a fundamental limitation. I've seen the inverse. I've seen interesting hardware be invented in search of a problem, and it's taken many years for the developers to figure out what to do with it. So I had the misfortune of becoming a VC in the kind of decline of semiconductor investing, and the semiconductor founders would say, hey, we can make these chips 10 times smaller, 10 times faster, 10 times lower power, and the developers didn't really know what to do with it. And it wasn't until 10 years later, now we're talking about AI and deep learning, and guess what? It's leveraging those technologies that folks 10 years ago funded and lost all their money on. And so if I were to choose my preference, so if I was a developer, if I was a software person, I would assume unlimited compute and sense capability, because even if it's not available today, it will be available to you 5, 6 years from now. I struggle to think of a single company that was hindered by the availability of hardware. It may have been expensive, it may have taken more time, but it eventually gets there. So I wouldn't hold back. Look at Uber, for example. Uber, there was crappy GPS 10 years ago, and there's crappy GPS today. But with software, they've been able to figure it out. And most people don't get lost, with their Ubers when they're in places like this, or they're indoors or in garages. So, I'm a big believer in software overcoming the shortcomings of hardware.
So it's interesting, but in the field of visualization, right, we were using, not we, but the technology was using the SGI O2s, and they waited till the video cards came out by Rambus and others before you could actually do three-dimensional visualization on a desktop and then on a laptop. So so there is sometimes about these technologies have to develop, but it sounds like in the robotics space as we are defining
But it's
it.
inevitable. But
Right.
what I'm trying to say is that it's inevitable. Even if
Right.
it hasn't
Those are
happened,
exceptions in effect.
yeah.
Great. Fantastic. Go ahead.
So to express a similar sentiment in a slightly different way, for me, my personal opinion would be, I actually see these things as orthogonal to each other, right? There is much to be developed in new hardware, some of which we haven't even imagined yet, and there is much to be explored in even in discrete mathematics, to say nothing of software, right? And bringing these two things together at various points along each of those curves, if you can do that in a creative way, then you have the opportunity not just to have fun, but perhaps to be successful. So, yeah.
One point that I would add on that side is when I think of hardware, if you extend it to infrastructure is definitely a big roadblock, right? Because when you think about the access to broadband or access to connectivity, even across the rural areas or remote areas, that still doesn't exist. You talk about anywhere outside of US or outside of developed countries, connectivity is definitely a big problem. So you think of that from the access to education or access to material, infrastructure is very difficult. So building that hardware part of infrastructure is basically the foundational steps in terms of getting a lot of these things built on top of that. From that perspective, imagine if there is no internet over here or there's no broadband. I know some places because Comcast and AT&T provide such a bad customer service from that perspective. But sometimes they are the only way for you to get access to broadband, even in the Bay Area. So I would think of that as definitely a big roadblock in terms of hardware.
I actually just want to share some perspectives as really again entrepreneur's perspective. I actually don't know. There must be a reason why you're wondering this. Is it more philosophical, just interest to you, or?
No, it's mainly because software is inexpensive to develop, but when it comes to hardware, there's a cost to it, right? It's intensely expensive to build anything, and because people have this ability to develop stuff on their laptop or something. And try it out on something else. Is this a thing that's limiting people from, exploring their potential? Because that was the reason why I was looking at this.
Well, yeah, it's still quite general. So for me, I think software or hardware products definitely have very different development cycles. Yeah. So if you are an entrepreneur thinking of working out on some products, and then you want to know what's your limited resources and how should you plan your runway or your production line and everything. I would still suggest focus on what problem you can solve, because there are different types of innovations. There are fundamental technology innovations, such just totally new sensors, new materials being discovered, etc. There are product innovations, and I do think, Roboterra has been working in this space, and then there are also service model innovations. So you have to know how you are solving the problem you want to solve, and then you can know the development cycle you can have. So.
Thank you.
So since you clarified, which is great, I would make one additional comment to color my earlier remarks, which is, there is a strong temptation in a lot of areas to underestimate just how difficult a problem the software really still is, right? It is very flexible, and it is, in some ways you're limited only by your imagination, but think of that as sort of the 80% of the solution, and then you have to then put in the other 80% of the effort to get that last 20% of benefit. So they proceed at different rates between hardware and software, but in many ways they do face similar challenges to really get to the finish line. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead. Sir.
So anytime robotic system interacts with human beings or society at large, you have the concerns about security and safety. So what are the regulatory hurdles that robotics companies face, especially when they want to deploy their solution in a public space? For example, autonomous cars, right? I think the technology will probably move along faster than the regulatory framework would allow entrepreneurs or companies to roll them out. So to that extent, what are the challenges and what are the issues that the entrepreneurs need to be thinking about when they're thinking about forming these companies?
Well, the political winds change very quickly, and it's often very difficult to predict them. As recently as last week, many of the existing sort of regulatory guidelines surrounding specifically autonomous vehicles were actually not removed entirely, but there was a statement prepended to them saying, these are only guidelines. So is that a good idea? That's hard to say. But sometimes the regulations stand in the way. Sometimes the regulations go away. So a different part of your question. How should we move forward, and what do we expect to happen, and how would we be responsible regardless of what the legal obligations are? Right? Yes, of course. We should have redundant systems in place. We should have follow even up to and including some of the existing functional safety standards that are applied in other contexts. But yeah, it's a good challenge.
And regulations haven't caught up with this stuff, as you can appreciate.
Well, I
right?
see that as a big challenge
Yeah.
for entrepreneurs, because we can have investors put in the money. The technologies can create technologies that will move along very quickly, but then commercial adaptation, acceptance by the society, insurance. How are insurance companies going to deal with self-autonomous?
Now, these things are all developing, and so my advice is do not tranche the investment. Take the cash up front, and then we deal with it later.
I know about
since Shaheen is not here, especially from Shaheen, they've got a big pot of cash. So, but I think it's a great question. I mean, on the security side, it's a very important question. I mean, you can see the mess with what's going on in the credit markets with real companies where they're having, huge problems of 150 million people in the United States are being affected by it. I mean, let alone the FCC regulations that they would eventually come up for drones and for, all the issues that they're fighting with autonomous vehicles, that Uber and, everybody else, Lyft are facing right now. But it's a great question. The answer is nobody knows. And then the other thing is, think about the inflection point that Shaheen was saying, right? They don't anticipate that you are going to be solving all these issues. But when you do hit some of these milestones, the inflection will be so high that it makes worth it for the risk that they're taking with the capital. Great. Anybody want to add to that? That's good. Who else? You had a question, please. The only born and raised person in the audience in Silicon Valley.
I know that was a little odd. I
Right.
felt strangely alone, but welcome everybody to Silicon Valley. My question is actually a little bit weighted towards the investors on the panel, but I'd welcome anyone else's opinion. China came back just in time. My stalling was effective. So my question is, we often hear people talking about, AI and robots, like, taking people's jobs and such things, right? You always hear about this. And my question is, has anyone ever seen this happen even once? And I'm not talking about like Sally's steam shovel. I mean, literally a worker with a job who a entrepreneur or startup company or whatever came along and said, we have this solution that will exactly drop in replace this worker, and you can fire them and use our thing. Like, has anyone actually seen that happen in real life? Or is it just nearly that, or kind of that, or maybe you were able to have less people in the call center, But has anybody ever come to you with a credible invention, or those of you who are entrepreneurs and your own friends in the entrepreneurial community, have you ever seen something that really would do exactly that?
But in the manufacturing field, that has been done, right? I mean, do you guys agree that in manufacturing, robotics have, in fact, to some extent, have displaced the individual workforce, and it's due to the robotics capacities. But that's something that came to my mind.
Let me pose the question differently, Adrian. So what if you ask the question like this? What is the enemy of jobs? Is the enemy of jobs robotics and automation? I think the enemy of jobs is not robotics and automation. I think the enemy of jobs is cheap labor. It's cheap labor, and to maintain those jobs, you then rely on technology that would obviate cheap labor or augment existing workers to become more efficient. Okay? So if you think about back in the day, there were people that that swept up whatever horse waste and brought water for them, and now you have drivers. So a profession was destroyed, which is tending to horses, but many more jobs was created, which is drivers, right? So if you think about existing jobs, when it comes to an existing job, a competitor to an existing job is a worker who's willing to do that existing job for less, okay? But as it relates to the impact of automation, if you look historically, automation has historically always led to more jobs and more higher quality jobs as a result of a given job being destroyed. There were people, for example, on the engineering, and all you guys are engineers, for those of you who are double E's, how many of you are double E's? Okay. There was a profession back in the day for people who basically looked up tables and designed filters. So to design a filter, you had to, there were engineers who were designed to do that, who would spend all day going through tables, doing a bunch of math to design a filter. Now you have MATLAB, and you put in two numbers, and you get your filter weights, basically, right? Your coefficients. And so yes, there was a job that was annihilated as a result of technology, but many new jobs were created because of that efficiency that was created.
You're saying, destruction and creation, but how do you see that as different from redirection?
Redirection is a result of cheap labor, right? So if you're competing for a given spot, then cheap labor is your enemy more so than innovation.
You're not actually putting people out of work. You're just getting them to do something different.
Exactly. So you're destroying a position for them, and you're creating something. Well, yeah. So you're just
Redirection is the
so
word.
no more shoveling, poop, and now you're sitting by an air conditioned, well, back then there's no air conditioning, but you're now driving a vehicle,
But it's not the same people. That's the problem. Like, the creation of new jobs, that's sort of new generation, a new set of training, new set of people.
Really? Well, I mean, like farmers back, so before the tractor, you had farmers out there, like working the fields. And then you had tractors, right? And tractors destroyed farming jobs, but those same people, I think, got jobs in the factories, didn't they?
I don't think so. I think that a lot of the farmers who were in the 50s when this thing started to happen, basically just lost their jobs and then passed on. Their kids.
Well,
I think
yeah.
that's what's happening. I think that over a large period of
Yeah, so I'm talking about the macro. Yeah, sure. And then from
It's the micro which is the problem, causing the society to be worried about what is the problem of robotics.
I mean,
true.
Rob, you wanted interactive, we've got interactive.
We can share here. I'm just standing in front of it.
Yeah, so the challenge really is trying to figure out how to get robotics innovations to be accepted by the society without causing an upheaval in people's lives. Because that sort of thing builds a pressure on the regulatory framework, for example, on the insurance framework. You know, companies provide insurance, and that slows down the whole innovation process. It's not an easy problem to solve, I don't think, at a societal level. But you know, it gives some interesting avenues to think about for entrepreneurs, right? We may not want to headlong rush into something that is super innovative, right? Maybe we want to find something that is slightly more incremental and can go with the pace at which the society can accept those solutions. Just a thought.
This is a brilliant conversation.
Yeah.
You were going to say something.
Yeah, I just want to add, because at the beginning when you're doing the survey, it's interesting that we don't have anyone with a government background, right? So Bill Gates is asking, hey, there should be tax imposed on robots, etc. So those are the ideas there, and I actually agree that definitely every generation or every time their technological advancement will always affect certain groups of people. So basically, yes, overall it will increase welfare. Human beings will enjoy all the time because of the wealth created, efficiency improved. But there are always certain group of people who will suffer from this. That's why, as a society, we'll have government's role and taxes. So policymakers, I hope policymakers can be in the whole picture together and think about that and then plan for that.
I had a bit of a secret agenda in
Great.
the question, which is just that it seems
We knew
like
you had a secret agenda.
Yeah, there's a bit of a myth that needs debunking, right? I mean, there's so much talk in sort of popular media about this sort of thing. Will robots take my job? Just Google this and see how many hits you get. And I'm not so sure that I don't think I know anybody who can build a robot that can really take anybody's job. I mean, it may be able to screw on some bolt that they screw on, but everybody's job is usually quite a bit broader than just do that one tiny little thing. So I was kind of curious, what people have seen. I think maybe we as people in the robotics community could do a little better job educating people that it's not like they're just gonna, just get replaced by some C-3PO like robot that not one of us could possibly build.
So
I think that's a very interesting.
Just to add to that,
Yeah.
so of course there have been jobs that have been replaced. Like for example, in banking, if you think about in New York, if you read about Goldman Sachs and other companies, they have replaced a lot of traders with AI, which is basically doing trading on their behalf now. So that's actually a real threat. Now the question comes is, instead of asking what jobs, like I generally kind of like talk about like what type of work is being done by these people. If it's kind of like, if there is no unpredictability and if kind of like what you're doing is a very repetitive task that can be automated, then yes. So there is like McKinsey has done a study which talks about like on a scale of when you look at like uncertain environments, unstructured environments, so like what is the last job that will be automated? So that's, some people talk about things where humans have to offer like comfort, like being a psychologist. Like, can a robot be a psychologist? I don't know. So
We're missing something here. I mean, like, if you can automate only half the people in a job pool, then you're not automating the job away, right? I mean, if you could automate the job away, you'd automate everything, right? If you can only automate the 50% of work that's the easy half, and therefore you can lay off half the people, that's not the same as a drop-in replacement or any one of those workers, right? So this is for sure real. Every kind of automation improves efficiency in a job pool, and of course you can sort of get rid of the weakest you pull in the pool, and you'll get more efficiency. But it's a very different thing to say, oh, this entire job is going to replaced. I don't think any one trader has ever been replaced by algorithm.
We're gonna need some
Shaheen.
economists in the group to address this question.
So
Go ahead, Rob.
I was a retail stockbroker. I used to take trades over the phone. I used to write the ticket, used to send it down to the stock exchange. So that profession, a retail stockbroker, blah, 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 has kind of been automated. I'm okay with it. Until they have a robot that can organize events, I'm okay. Go ahead.
So I think follow up to one of the gentleman's question, he asked about how hardware is kind of catching up to software. My question is actually about the mechanics. So I think Ashish, you mentioned about apple picking. I'm wondering how is the mechanical movement is catching up to the whole system interaction of the processor and the software and the sensors. And I think it kind of goes into replacing some jobs like the apple picking.
So I think one of the hardest problems that people were trying to solve for apple picking was how do you actually like pick the apple, right? Because of the nature of how the food industry is kind of structured, if you get like a little bit of damage on the fruit, the retail value of the fruit goes down by 30 to 40%. That's why there are companies around which are basically selling like those food prices. There's a company that basically actually built around that. So that's why they kind of started using suction. And other companies are basically on the agriculture side are using like different type of soft tissues so that the fruit doesn't get destroyed. So it's kind of the economic sense of like what you are trying to do basically defines a lot of ways of it's like how you would actually perform that action. Like for example, people are trying to now look at how gecko is kind of like sticking to the wall in terms of like using the adhesive. And now they're trying to use that to basically build an arm that can pick and place different types of items in a factory environment. Because humans spend a lot of time kind of like on a factory line picking and placing a lot of these items, which are like of different shapes, weights, and varieties. So from that perspective, a lot of these technologies are currently being looked upon, and whether it's suction versus kind of actually picking with a soft tissue, the innovation in hardware is definitely driving a lot of these innovation in how you kind of like make these mechanical systems to interact. So if, for example, we talked about like how people are building like these service robots. Now one of the companies on that side, like Cobalt Robotics, is actually basically focused on, they partnered with one of the leading designers to actually build a robot that human feels like I want to interact with. Because of iPhone, our understanding of like a robot has to basically look like really nice, otherwise I'm not going to interact with it. Like our expectations have become very, very high from that perspective. So people have to keep up with that and start thinking about applying those design thinking if it's a consumer-facing robot. If it's an enterprise robot, then yes, as long as it's functional, people won't care.
The gentleman right up here on the second row, you've had a question for a while.
Hang on.
The microphone is coming.
There you go.
This question is more aligned to the impact of automation, right? And we talked about potentially reskilling the people or redistribution, as you call it. I was in Detroit area when we had the big auto downturn, right? So I was witness to the social impact that was there. Just interesting to know if there is any intersection of government policy makers, the entrepreneurs, the VCs, the legals, on discussions around what automation is going to impact, say 5-10 years down the lane, and is there any progressive steps being taken behind the scenes on the social impact, on how to potentially reskill people on the jobs impacted? Is that happening, or?
Yeah, I'm not a policymaker, but it's my expectation that, I mean, if you look historically, a lot of the great scientific research back in the early 20th century was funded by places like the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation. Like these titans of industry funded a lot of basic research that led to jobs being created in the future. So I'm more of an advocate of the kind of free market kind of system, with the expectation that if somebody comes around and annihilates all the farming jobs, or let's say, for example, somebody comes around and annihilates VC as a profession, then they would, now that I'm unemployed, I can hope that, my, progeny or whatever, would have somewhere to go as a result of whoever profits, for example, from from that change that unfortunately disrupted me. So I feel like as if as a society we've been good at taking care of one another, but of course, to the earlier gentleman's point, like there will be broken glass, there will people that'll be out of the job, and that's unfortunately part of progress. But we should minimize that because it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because my training in both applied economics and also the business Roboterra is doing is actually preparing this younger generation for the future, economy and labor market, and also, as a value entrepreneur. So I've been asked by the World Economic Forum to serve as one of the 22 Global Future Council member on AI and robotics. This. So on this council, there are other CEOs like IBM CEOs, Infosys CEOs, or the White House CTO, and a lot are the leading scholars in AI, machine learning from Berkeley, CMU, etc. So basically, even at the World Economic Forum level, the international level, or the UN. I mean, there are 2 conferences I have to attend and then really contribute my perspective each year on this. What I'm seeing actually is even for all those international political leaders and a lot of business leaders outside of AI and robotics, they have ideas almost similar to what this gentleman is describing as what we're seeing, in just by Googling or in general media, that people just have so much fear because they just don't understand. So they try to stick, or they were stuck with this sci-fi idea that, some humanoid like robots are coming and taking over our jobs and then we lose everything. So those are what on the leadership level we have. So I would say, definitely, to come up with good, tax plans for better retraining or, skill set training for the affected groups, such as the drivers who will be affected by autonomous driving development. I think it's just the beginning now, how government should be working with the industry and should be working with scholars. So there are people working together on this.
Just one brief comment. Let's also not forget that none of these things happen overnight. No new product is perfect on the day that it's introduced. The sort of news scare tactics. Selling newspapers by saying that thousands of or hundreds of thousands of people are going to be out of work tomorrow and they're going to be surprised by this, right? I mean, I don't know about everyone else, but I certainly don't expect to be doing exactly the same thing I'm doing today in 10 years or even 5 or maybe even 2, right? So I mean, these changes must needs happen over time, and we will see them coming and we will react to them in a way that helps minimize some of that bumpy ride.
Great. What a great discussion. This is absolutely brilliant. Thank you to all the panelists to provide such fabulous ideas. Great questions from the audience. Thank you so much for participating. And
let's give it up for our panel. Let's give it up for Armin, our moderator.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
And let's give it up for our audience.
Yes.
I forgot to mention Perkins Coie, our video team, and our event team, and all our partners. Last but not least, let's give it up for me. So please stick around. The video will be available on our YouTube channel in a few weeks, youtube.com/idea-IPO. Our panel will stick around for a few minutes. Ideally, we'd like to leave the building by 9. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can go to the parking lot, then we can go to Starbucks, 2000 El Camino, and then there's also the Rosewood. So, and it's Wednesday night, not Thursday night.
There's a closer spot. If you guys want on California Avenue here, if you guys all want to join each other and have a powwow on California Avenue, there's a Cuban restaurant. It's just the first block on the south side of the street. That's probably a good place for you guys to hang out. So do it there instead of.
Drinks are on Armin. Sure. All right. Thanks for coming. See you next time.